r/prorevenge. Killed a tow company with one simple phone call. I killed an entire tow company with one phone call on mobile. So bear with me. Several years back I went to work for a towing company. It's about all I know how to do other than paint cars, which is drastically affecting my health. The pay was pretty decent, but we had to share trucks and the boss felt that he knew where we needed to sit in order to get the best calls. This is important for later. Several months in, I realized that I was not making the type of money that I should be making. So I took the opportunity while I was sitting in a parking lot one evening to start researching the laws pertaining to employees in similar positions. He was kind of an a-hole and the trucks had transponders so that he could see if we had them idling with the air conditioner on a hot day, or idling with the heat on a cold day. He was always calling complaining about something if the wheels were not turning. During my research I discovered that if he was requiring us to sit in a certain parking lot, street, or any location of his choosing, then we were entitled to be paid an hourly wage, not just our commission. The technical term was engaged to wait. However, if he allowed us to freely roam about while we waited for calls, we were not entitled to hourly wages and we were therefore considered waiting to be engaged. I never mentioned this to him, but I did start taking note of my time. Another month or so goes by and he decided to start coming down on me for tiny little BS. Things that ordinarily wouldn't even matter, such as I forgot a pop can in the cup folder. He actually had a screaming fit about that. At this point I was tired of working there and had already found another job, so I decided it was time to put my plan into motion. I called him up, told him that we needed to have a conversation about my final wages and that we could meet at his convenience. Upon entering the office I laid out my argument, explained the state law, and told him I expected to be paid for the hours that I was on the clock but not freely allowed to roam looking for work or able to do things of my choosing. He told me in no uncertain terms would not be paid for that time, as that was agreed to upon my employment. I did not bother to argue, as I already had my next step planned, so I took my final check and I left. The following Monday, I made a phone call to the State Labor Board, where I laid out my case to them. Needless to say, they were very interested in what was going on. In the end, they came to review his employment records and speak to the drivers still working. When he got the bill of what he had to pay us all, it was too much for him to afford, so he sold the trucks, his boat, and lot and went out of business. I never got the money owed to me in full, only a fraction, but the satisfaction of knowing the law just a little bit better than he did and watching it all burn was pure bliss. Too long didn't read. Boss ducks us on legally entitled wages. I sink his company with one phone call. Noisy neighbor gets silenced. Back in the 80s, I lived in a flat in southeast London. The flat was located in a small tower block 10 stories high with 4 flats per floor, one per corner as it were. The flat overlooked a local park and afforded very nice views of the area. The neighbors were generally very amenable, but everybody tended to keep to themselves, so no one had any problems with anyone. That all changed when a new family moved into a flat down on the 2nd floor on the same corner of the building where we lived. We lived on the 8th. They were not the most gracious of individuals, frequently leaving rubbish bags strewn around their floor's lobby for days, rather than depositing them in the communal bins, and parking their cars in other residents' allocated parking spots. In other words, the epitome of the Appalachian chav. Complaints to the local council invariably fell on deaf ears. They soon developed a reputation for hosting loud drunken parties at the weekends which tended to go past midnight. This was pretty fucking annoying for us and the other residents, but we were somewhat less affected due to the distance between our respective flats. One particular Friday evening, however, proved to be the straw that broke the camel's back. At around 10 PM we heard the music start up, but it now appeared that the hosts had recently purchased a new sound system, because the bass was now intolerably loud. I can only surmise that a peculiarity of the building's design, coupled with what sounded like much larger bass speakers, appeared to magnify the effect in our bedroom to the point where it made it quite impossible to sleep. At about 11:30 PM, I trotted downstairs and knocked on their door. It was flung open by what I could only assume to have been the male resident, looking somewhat the worse for wear. I politely asked him if he'd mind turning the music down as it was very loud, rattling the furniture in my flat and making it difficult to sleep. Duck off. Door slams. Charming. though. So I go back upstairs and call the non-emergency police number and explain the situation. They assured me that someone would be around in due course. Being a Friday night, I reckoned it might take an hour or two. So, with much wailing and gnashing of teeth, we sat there waiting for the cops to rock up. Sure enough, about an hour later, I saw a patrol car pull up and a couple of London's finest enter our building. A few moments later, the music gets turned down and the police leave. No sooner had a car disappeared up the street than the music went back up to its previous level. We endure it for another half hour. No change. So once again I call the cops. This time it takes closer to 2 hours for them to turn up. Yep, definitely a busy Friday night. They finally arrive around 3 AM and once again the music is reduced to a sensible level. Unfortunately, shortly after they depart, back up goes the volume to its previous furniture shaking intensity. As you might imagine, by now I was royally pissed off. And indoors too. Someone not normally prone to displays of anger was positively foaming at the mouth and looked like she was single-handedly going to reenact the Battle of Austerlitz in glorious technicolor, together with full orchestral accompaniment. It was then that I had a dazzling idea. One so fiendishly cunning and yet devilishly simple. A guaranteed cast iron, 100% pure, 24 karat stonker of an idea so brilliant that I felt certain that within a few minutes, I could stop this once and for all, and execute my plan in such a way as to make it impossible to trace back to me. Cue maniacal cackling whilst twirling imaginary moustache. Grabbing my toolkit, I crept down the stairwell to the second floor, just to double check the actual flat number. Having confirmed the number, I went back up to the 4th floor. In the stairwell just next to the exit door to the 4th floor lobby was a wooden access door that concealed one of the 2 electrical distribution panels for the entire building. The door was only secured by dint of a simple square key fitting, and the application of a large flat blade screwdriver would pop the latch no problem. Thus I opened the door to reveal the distro itself. Pulling the cover open, I was presented with a large panel containing 20 large 80 amp fuses, one each for the lower set of flats. Each one was neatly labeled with the flat's number and it was but a moment to locate the appropriate one. Now, by one of those happy coincidences that usually only occur in the more egregious examples of the Hollywood B-movie, I just happened to have in my toolkit a dead fuse of exactly the same type and capacity. A few weeks previously I'd had to replace a similar fuse in the theater where I worked, and I'd tossed the dead fuse in my toolbox where I'd promptly forgotten about it. Until now. Now, with all my ducks in a neat row, I pulled the fuse carrier for the miscreants flat out. Instant. Blessed silence. I rapidly swapped the live fuse for the dead one and reinserted the carrier, securing everything back up again. I casually strolled back upstairs to enjoy a few hours in the hallowed arms of Morpheus. Addendum. Some weeks later, the troublesome family were moved out of their flat. It transpired that the local council had received so many noise complaints over the previous 6 months that they were obliged to rehouse them elsewhere. Screw over your employees. Don't be too shocked when your dirty laundry starts catching up to you. Reposting this now that I have sufficient karma and whatnot to not get auto-moderated away. Crap, I think I accidentally deleted this when trying to delete my cross-post to comply with r/nuclear revenge rules. So I need to keep this somewhat vague to maintain anonymity. And I wasn't there for all of it. This mostly happened to my friend, who was one of the employees screwed over, but I did what I could to help my friend get revenge. Friend of mine was employed as a barista for a coffee shop with a couple of locations. Well, the owner turned out to be a grade A scumbag. Started paying the employees with bad checks, not giving them their tips if they were paid on a credit card. Obviously he couldn't steal their cash tips. Not that he didn't try. Things along those lines. He was, of course, stealing from the business to fund his own lavish lifestyle. My friend was pissed and quit shortly after this nonsense started. And of course the business shortly went under. But if that's all that happened, this wouldn't fit in pro-revenge. Now, my friend was out a few $1,000s. I'm not sure exactly how much, but enough that it was a serious hit to their budget. And they weren't the only one. This creep was the classic con man, writing checks to cover the bad checks. All the delay tactics you ever see. Oh, the bank must have messed up. just redeposit it and of course it comes back as a bad check a week or two later. Lots of shady stuff, but he was a good con man. All told, 8 people were getting screwed over to, I found out later, in excess of $20K. So one afternoon, my friend is telling me this story, how he's so sick and tired of being conned by this creep, as well as everyone else. And here is where the pro-revenge part begins to come into effect. I start digging into the business owner, all public record stuff, and some of it I learned from my friend, or their co-workers, but started to learn a lot about this scumbag. He's got multiple felonies in his past. I'm all for giving people a second chance, but this guy wasn't that old, and had racked up easily a half dozen felonies. Why he wasn't still in jail is a topic for a much different forum. One of his convictions was for being a felon in possession of a firearm. He was currently on probation for the above conviction. This is where things start getting interesting. A little more light digging and I come up with the name of his probation officer. When I sat and talked to my friend about what I had found out about his prior employer, 2 cycles of bounced checks was enough. He happened to mention that he had seen firearms in his apartment. They'd hung out together socially before things went completely pear-shaped. He'd used his girlfriend to purchase firearms since he was a prohibited person. Straw purchase. Yet another felony. So now as things get really interesting, I put my friend in contact with Scumbag's probation officer. Turns out when you are out on probation, there's a lot of things you're not allowed to do. One of them is commit more felonies. This is an automatic revocation of your probation and will land your happy little butt back in jail. Oh. And knowingly passing bad checks in our state for the amount he was writing them for is a felony in and of itself. 8 employees, 3 payroll cycles, before the business officially went belly up. 23 felony counts of passing a bad check, since my buddy bailed at 2 cycles. Repeat offense of being a felon in possession of a firearm. As if that's not bad enough, when his probation officer came a knock-in to check on these allegations, he also found drug paraphernalia and drugs sufficient to get him for possession of controlled substances with intent to distribute. Multiple different drugs. So multiple counts of that too. For those keeping score at home, if he was convicted of all of these counts, he would be looking at roughly an additional 30 felonies. Easily enough to keep him in jail for a very long time. Now, if this were petty revenge, that's where things would have stopped. But you see, the state has this fund that all employers pay a tax into. It's a fund for those situations where the company goes out of business, writes bad checks for their employees, etc. And it's administered by the state labor board. So they pay out to cover the lost wages, but not the lost tips of the employees. But the state is not benevolent in this. Oh no, you see, in order to attempt to recoup their losses, they can seize company assets. And in the case of a poorly set up company with no separation of assets between the company and the owner, they can also seize personal assets. Oh yes, that shiny new company truck that you're towing your shiny new boat with, guess what, scumbag? They now belong to the state. Your bank accounts? Yep, those belong to the state now too. Now surely, you must be thinking, surely this is now pro-revenge, right? Oh no, you see, this scumbag messed with my friend. And I don't take kindly to that kind of nonsense. You see, my friend learned throughout this process that on top of all this, his former employer was committing tax fraud evasion. As far as the employees were concerned, they were all straight up W-4 employees, meaning he was withholding the correct taxes, payroll taxes, Medicare taxes, etc. Except he was reporting to the IRS that all of his employees were independent contractors, and wasn't actually withholding any taxes at all. Taxes for the company? He was fudging those so badly they should have been sold as brownies. Unfortunately for Scumbag, a friend of a friend happened to work for the local IRS office, and after sitting with him over drinks one evening, found out that the IRS has a tip line for reporting tax evasion, and depending on how it's reported, well, turns out that the person reporting the tax evasion may actually get a small percentage as a reward for turning in the tax cheat. So on top of facing 30 some odd felony charges, on top of having all his personal and company assets seized, Scumbag now has the IRS chasing after him. That, dear readers, is pro-revenge. Edit. Holy crap, my first silver, gold, and platinum. Thank you generous redditors. I will definitely update this as more developments come in. I can say that because this scumbag is such a scumbag. He is currently sitting in jail awaiting trial for domestic assault on his girlfriend. My friend and his co-workers have been interviewed by local police and the probation officer, as well as the IRS and the ATF, for the straw purchases of the firearms through his girlfriend. My understanding is she's made a deal with the ATF to avoid charges for the straw purchases in exchange for her testimony against him. The DA and probation officer are waiting for him to be sentenced on the domestic violence charges before they go after him for all the other stuff. That way he has to serve the sentences consecutively. As far as the federal charges, who knows when those will be filed, but my understanding is that no matter when he's charged, he'll have to serve the federal time after his state prison time, and won't get any credit for time served in the state pen. Bro, you made it to the end? You're a ducking mad lad. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content. It's free and that's a great price.